So one of the things that we're wrestling with at ARC is identity in a digital age, and that's the topic that you just very eloquently expanded upon from a religious perspective. And we're trying to do some of this in the most practical possible manner. And so one of the questions that my wife is trying to address at the moment is, while she's trying to investigate the nature of femininity, and not from the postmodernist or feminist perspective, let's say, what does it mean to be female, and how is that distinct from being male? And this is a very complicated problem. And one of the ways to make that practical is to lay out something approximating a timeline. Like the timeline, as you've pointed out, there's an implicit timeline for women in modern society now. And the implicit timeline for ambitious women, let's say, is establish yourself as an independent creature between 20 and 30 so that you don't have to depend on a man. Prioritize your education and your career, which is a very weird thing for lefty progressives to be telling young women, since in principle they're opposed to the corporate kleptocracy, and yet insist at the same time that women should bow down to it and serve it during their youthful years, which is a paradox I just can't reconcile. But the problem with that, as you've pointed to already, and as we've discussed, is that the window of reproductive opportunity for women is actually pretty damn short. It's a maximum of 20 years. And practically it's less than that. I would say optimally it's more like 10. And then I've kind of tried to think that through arithmetically too, because what that means for the typical woman, I think, and this is for the typical high-functioning, attractive woman, is that she probably only has the opportunity to assess about 5 partners. You know, if people are actually interested in you, which is not a given, how long does it take to investigate a relative stranger to determine whether or not they're a suitable partner, assuming that's what they want? And I think you're fortunate if you do that 5 times in 10 years. Like that's a stretch goal. And so you have to solve that problem pretty early. And maybe we need to be more pointed. It's like, the Victorians believed that a woman should be married by 22, something like that. I think that was threshold for old maid. It was something pretty young. That has a harshness about it, let's say. But so does being involuntarily childless at 35, by the way, right, which is the fate of 1 in 4 women now. So it's also the case, interestingly, that women live about 7 years longer than men, and so you could imagine you could just have that 7 years for your little kids, because you can do a pretty good job with little kids, making them their priority for 7 years. So if you're thinking this through, if you were setting up an optimal life course for a young woman in an advisory capacity, like, how do you view the role of a young woman in her, let's say, from 15 to 19 and then from 20 to 25? Let's break it into 5-year periods and tell me what you think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got a couple of those in my house. Well, passing through my house. I've got a 19-year-old and a 21-year-old daughter. And, what we tell them is, especially during the teen years, your job is friendship. Like, I think we have a marriage crisis in this country because we have a dating crisis, and we have a dating crisis because we have a friendship crisis. It is very hard for young people these days to form and maintain healthy peer relationships. Obviously, because the digital space has taken over a lot of their peer-to-peer communications. And so you really do have to train your kids to maximize and develop their same-sex friendships during the teen years. A lot of that is going to be modeling. Are you modeling good same-sex friendships in terms of vulnerability, but good boundaries where you need it with different people? Are you showing them the transparency, how you need one another, how you rejoice when they rejoice and mourn when they mourn? I mean, you become what you behold, okay? For better or worse. And so model great friendships, obviously. I am of the persuasion, I am not one of the kind of kissed dating goodbye Christians, courtship only. I actually do think that there is a role for dating in high school and college, because I do think that you need to appropriately practice interacting with the opposite sex. So I've told my daughters, when they're juniors and seniors, that if a boy has the guts to say, do you want to go out and get coffee? You should say, yeah, I'd love to. You need to reward him for having the courage to ask you in person to do that. You don't have to say yes. And of course, you never need to do it if you feel creeped out or anything like that. But there is you talk about men being civilized, and I would say the proper understanding of that is that women civilize the men. It is women that have the civilizing effect on men. And the example I always use is when I'm walking down the street in Seattle and I see 3 men coming towards me on the sidewalk, I don't care how big they are, what race they are, I will cross to the other side of the street. I'm not going to walk past them. But if I see those 3 men walking hand in hand with their girlfriend or wives, I'm not going to cross the street. Okay, there's just something in me that knows that male behavior has changed because they are now united and they've bonded themselves to a woman in some way. Okay, so I tell my girls, you have an incredible power on men to elevate their behavior, their choices, their decisions by how you respond to them. Okay. It is the soft power that shapes the world, right? That's what women really are. The soft power that shapes the world, not the dominant, naggy power, the soft, beautiful, alluring power that changes the world. So I do think that there's a role of dating, and I do think that we should encourage healthy dating, not drunkenness, not permanent friend zone, not jumping in and hooking up, a slow, careful dating relationship where there's parental involvement, where you can evaluate, especially worldview alignment. And then when you get into college, I told my 19-year-old, who is an incredible soccer player, and just, oh my gosh, all of my kids are incredible. My 19-year-old was looking for a college. She considered one that had a 75% female to male ratio. And I said, you won't even apply to that college. Absolutely not. Like, this is your primary age, the primary window for you to find somebody who is like-minded, join your life to them in a cornerstone kind of marriage, not a capstone marriage where you figure it all out and then put the cherry on the top marriage. No, we're going to be strategic about who you're exposed to between the ages of 18 and 22. This is your chance. And I think parents have a huge role to play in encouraging early family formation, early marriage, proper dating. You can't control everything. You shouldn't try to control everything, but the messages that you send, the signals that you send, the environments you put your kid in, it can lead them to the place where they are not involuntarily single when they're 30.